Hello and welcome back. This is Dawn with another video for Pinkfresh Studios. So today I'm going to show you two very simple cards using very minimal color. So we're going to do a monochromatic look. This is great if you don't have a lot of ink colors. You can still get beautiful, gorgeous, elegant results. So I got this idea from the cards that I actually created for the blog hop for Pinkfresh. So here you can see I created these two cards using the Blooming Arch stamp and stencils, and I just used two colors of ink. I used Blue Jay and Sapphire, and this gave me this beautiful, almost like the delicate china look, and I absolutely fell in love with this. The garden party die there, the big bold flowers, actually contrasted so beautifully with those delicate florals. So I wasn't quite done visiting this, and I wanted to try this look but with some different products. And there are lots of stamp sets from Pinkfresh that this will work beautifully with. Today we're going to use the Kindness in Bloom stamp set, and I'm going to be using again that Blue Jay and Sapphire ink. So I've already loaded this up in my MISC, and I'm going to stamp it first in Blue Jay ink. So this is my lighter of the two, but just like I want some variation in my ink blending, I also want some variation in my outline. So I'm going to go ahead and ink the whole thing up with Blue Jay, stamp that down, and then I'm going to add a little bit of the Sapphire ink here and there, and that's going to create some darker areas of my stamping, but it's going to give me a good mix of the lighter and then the darker. It's such a subtle difference, but trust me, it does make a difference. So here we go. We'll go ahead and stamp that down again, and now I've got my outline done. Now I know that I'm going to need at least 2 sets of these. So I'm going to go ahead and do multiple panels, and that way when I go to do my ink blending, I have all of my panels and I can just do all of my ink blending at once. Speaking of ink blending, it's time to go ahead and take care of that. So I've grabbed that Kindness in Bloom stencil. Now here you can see on the back that this is very irregular ink blending. The stencils are not meant to cover the entire area. So there's some white space left in the images when you're done. This is actually very, very forgiving. If you misalign your stencil a little bit, it's not going to matter because there's whole areas of the stencil that don't have color on them. And you'll see exactly what I mean here when we're done. So if you struggle with stencils and lining things up, this is a very forgiving one because it has more of an artistic, almost abstract look to the way that the color is added through the stencil. So speaking of, there are only 3 stencils in this set, which is another reason why it's a great one for beginner stenciling, or if you have problem stenciling, you know, if it's something that you struggle with. It's a good kind of transition set into larger layering sets. So definitely one that you should check out if you are intimidated by layering stencils or you haven't quite been bit by the bug yet. So here you can see I've just done that first layer, and I've done a very light layer. Here I'm checking to see if I want to add a little bit more color. And I do, because this one stencil here is the only stencil for the leaves. So if I colored it all flat one color, which you can and it would look great, it's not going to give me the same look as that fine china. I want some blends of lighter blue and darker blue. And since I don't have a second stencil for the leaves here, I'm going to go ahead and achieve that lighter and darker mix manually. So in some areas of the openings of the stencil here, I'm going to come in and add a little bit of that sapphire, and I'm just going to darken up some areas while leaving some areas that lighter Blue Jay. Now for the second stencil, I'm going to go ahead and do this one all in the Blue Jay. But again, I'm going to ink it a little unevenly. In some areas, I'm going to use a lighter hand and apply less ink so I get a very light blue. And then in some areas, I am going to apply it a little bit heavier so that I get that, I want to say a mid-tone. So in my resulting image, I will have kind of like a lighter blue, a mid-tone blue, and then a darker shadow blue. So here we go, just very, very simple stencil here. Add that little bit of color, and again add a little bit of variation, so I've got some light and some dark. And then it's time to move on to the third stencil. So at any time you can always pull the stencil back, hold it in place with one finger, and then check your progress, and if need be you can just lay that stencil back down and keep stenciling. So now for this third stencil, I'm going to come in and do all sapphire. And this I am going to put the heaviest color. When I do this technique, I do like to work from light to dark. So each stencil I will get progressively darker with my color. And again, that just ensures that I have a good mix of lights, mids, and darks. So with that last layer done, I can go ahead and put this one off to the side, and then I can work on my next panel. So I'll just go ahead and lay down the next one, and I will repeat this process again. Like I said, this one goes very, very quickly because there are only 3 stencil layers. All right, so once all of those are done, then I'm going to go ahead and cut out all of my images using the Kindness in Bloom coordinating die. So I'll just line that up, tape it into place, and then send it through my die cut machine. All right, so that's going to give me this little pile of florals here to build my card with. And then I've also taken that die and cut it from some matte gold foil cardstock, and I'm going to create almost like a little drop shadow. So I'm going to glue the foil to the back of each flower, but I don't want to do that just yet. First, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of experiment and see what I want to create. So my first thought was to create an all over background pattern. Again, I mentioned that this reminded me of that blue and white bone china. I'm not going to try to pronounce the word. I will butcher it. I just know it starts with a CH. It's a style. I'm not even going to try to say it because no, not even. But if you're familiar, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And there's different styles. So the arch in bloom, the blooming arch, I think it was blooming arch. That particular one has all of the trellis ironwork, and so it's very dainty and detailed, and that reminds me of one type of that china. But then these bolder, more stylized florals here, they also remind me of another type of that china that I've seen done in the same color scheme. So of course, an all over random tossed pattern here was on the agenda. It's one of my go-tos. I really, really do love creating patterns, background patterns. So I had to give it a go with this. So I'm going to go ahead and lay out how I want this to end up in the end. I'm distributing my flowers evenly. So I want to make sure that I don't have all of my flowers in one corner and then just a bunch of leaves in the other. So you can see I'm laying down a big flower at the top left. I've balanced that with another one of that large flower there in the bottom right. And then I'm going to, continue that thought process. So if I put this small flower here in between the large flowers, then I want to balance that by adding another small flower on the other side. So I just want to make sure that I'm balancing it with flower type and flower size and making sure that they're evenly distributed around the pattern. Once I was happy with my pattern, I'm going to go ahead and start creating that little gold drop shadow there. So I'm going to pick up each element one at a time. I'm going to adhere them to the gold drop shadow there, and then I'm going to adhere that into place. So I can do all of it right now, and that way I don't have to redo the pattern. So if I just pick them up one at a time, adhere the gold to the background, and then adhere that piece to the card front, then I know that my pattern is going to stay exactly the same. Once I've got everything glued into place, I trimmed off anything that was hanging over the edges, and now I have this very simple yet elegant background panel to work with. And I wanted to keep in that elegant vein, so I pulled out the new Dotted Fancy Frames die, and I'm using the 2 smallest dies here in the set. And I die cut one from that matte gold foil cardstock and another one from white. For the sentiment, I grabbed the Here For You sentiments. Absolutely love the font in this. Again, timeless, classic. Covers a wide variety of occasions, just a really good one. So I'm going to stamp that in Pinkfresh's Detail Black ink here, right on that white label. Then I'm going to adhere that on top of that matte gold foil cardstock. This is going to give it a nice little frame there, and it's going to complement the gold drop shadow on the florals. Using a little bit of foam tape, we're going to adhere that directly to the middle of the cardstock. So I'm going to line that up on my grid mat, and then I'm just looking at that top point and making sure that it's centered with that center line, and there we go. Now, I want to add a little something extra. This is a very simple card. So I pulled out the gold dust gems here, and I'm going to sprinkle them in between all the gaps of the florals here. This is just going to fill in some of that white space and then add a little bit of bling. Once I had them all in place, I can just use a little liquid adhesive to adhere each one down. And this actually went super, super quick. I think gluing these down took me 3 minutes. So it looks tedious, but it goes really quickly. And that is pretty much going to finish up this card. Now I did have a couple of those little floral pieces left over, so let's go ahead and jump right into the next card. All right, so here's these leftover floral pieces I have, and I wanted to create a textured background. So I'm using the Charming Stitched Florals press plate here, and I'm gonna go ahead and run that through my die cut machine. And this creates this gorgeous pierced floral pattern in the background. So subtle, yet so impactful. Now for our focal point here, I'm gonna use the, what is this one? This is the fancy rectangle frame. And we're gonna cut the middle-sized one from that matte gold foil. And here you can see, this is gonna give us this beautiful little detailed, almost like a gallery frame. It reminds me of kind of an ornate picture frame. Being in that gold, I think it's really gonna set off that blue. Now the center area here, it will also cuts out that little rectangle. I had cut one out of white earlier, so I'm just going to use that piece to inset back in there to give us a nice clean background. And then my florals, I'm going to end up arranging something like this. I'm not positive at this point. Again, I'm working on the fly, you guys. I just turn on the camera and start creating. So I'm going to put that off to the side. I'm going to go ahead and glue this down. Now my die cutting machine has a lot of pressure, so it tends to really cut into this, which kind of warps the background a little bit. And in order to keep playing around and building things on top, I need it to lay flat. So we're going to go ahead and adhere that to my card base. And then I like to use a bone folder to burnish these into place. Anytime I have something that's a little warped, using liquid adhesive and then using your bone folder to really burnish that to the surface helps to get even coverage and helps it to adhere really well. Then I'm going to put it under my MISC while it completely dries. Now, my frame here was a little bit, I don't want to say flimsy, but I mean, for lack of a better word, it was a little flimsy. So the white frame that I had cut earlier, I'm going to go ahead and adhere that to the back. And this is just going to give it just a little bit more stability. Now, normally I would not adhere white to the back of gold. However, I'm going to be putting this on a white background and my little rectangle there on the inside is white. So it's not going to be a big deal. Even if it's not perfectly lined up, it's okay. It's white on white, so it's not going to show up. Now to adhere the frame, I did want it to pop up away from the card a little bit. So I've trimmed down some foam adhesive here into thin strips, and then I'm applying it to the back. I am leaving a tiny little gap there, what's going to eventually be the lower left side, and that's so that I can tuck the stems of the florals up underneath it. And then my rectangle here will get inset into the center. I can go ahead and adhere this now to the center, and then I'll adhere that rectangle directly to the card base right in the center of this frame. And then it'll be time to arrange my florals and do my sentiment. Again, these are very super simple, elegant cards. So I've arranged those florals there in the center. Now I'm just picking out which sentiment I want to use. Again, I'm going to go with that Here For You sentiment set. The font here, like I said, timeless. And just like in the last card, we're going to use the detail black ink for our sentiment color. Now, I do this a lot. You guys have seen it now in video after video. Whenever I start working with a product, I go ahead, I die cut extra or I stamp extra, because I know that by using the same supplies, I can just tweak the design and then I can get multiple cards out of one session. This for me is kind of the game changer into really maximizing how much use you get out of each set or each product. All right, so now it's just time to assemble everything. I'm using the low profile foam tape to adhere my flowers here. I'm using a mixture. So at the bottom, I'm going to tuck that stem up under the edge of the frame there. So I'm using some liquid adhesive. Then I'm popping up a couple of the leaves and the flower. Now this other little leaf here, it happened to get grabbed by the foam tape on the back of the large flower. So I can just add a little liquid adhesive to these leaves that are hanging over the frame and adhere those in place, and that should hold that just fine. I use that same method to adhere that last little leaf segment there at the bottom, and then this creates a little gap here that I can nestle my sentiment into perfectly. So I'm going to put a little bit of foam adhesive on the back of this along with some liquid adhesive where it's laying over the frame, and then I'll adhere that in place. And that pretty much finishes this off. So let's go ahead and recap our cards. So first let's take a look at the cards that inspired today's cards. Here we have the This is the Blooming Arch, and like I said, this is where it all started. I went with that monochromatic blue jay and sapphire, and then I added those garden party blooms to the center there. I borrowed a lot of the elements from these cards to make my cards today, but instead of, keeping it very folksy almost, we went more elegant. Even though the flowers that we used here can be considered folksy, I think that addition of the gold, that gold foil, that elegant font, and then here those gems really elevates this. And the monochromatic color scheme here also lends itself very well to timeless classic styles. These can easily be used in a more cheerful manner, like with multicolors and something bright, but I think that there is just something about the simple color palette and the gold foil additions that really just brings this up a notch and takes it from folksy to more elegant and refined. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. If you're looking for any of the featured supplies, you can find them in the description box below. As always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.